It's 2023, and what is the state of journalism today in our great country of Canada? Well, today I'm going to be talking with our guest, the great Holly Doan, the publisher of the Blacklocks Reporter. Welcome, Holly.
Nice to see you, David.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense, and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
Well, Holly, it's an honor to have you back again on Leaders on the Frontier. We want to cover a lot of ground today, from Bill 18 regarding, taking this huge, massive internet. That, if we look at the social media providers like Facebook, the whole idea was to take revenues from them and shift it over to the media, the so-called content providers or producers. So what's your take on Bill C-18 and how that's all shaken out? It's been really quite a week.
It's my view that the government has understood that the media subsidies have been really unpopular and they're a dog anyway, and they're never going to save the media. And so they wanted to shift responsibility away from this and get the tech giants to pay for allegedly what they are stealing from content. Mm-hmm. That's the messaging. That's not actually, in fact, how it works. Most media outlets, at the onset of the internet and with the rise of the social media giants, have offered their content for free, in the hopes that somehow they will get multiple visits, multiple viewers, multiple hits back on their sites, and that they'll somehow be able to monetize that. And when they found they couldn't monetize it after a generation of giving it away for free, they now accuse the tech giants of stealing it. So C-18 was meant to ask the tech giants to pay a portion every time you link to a news story that you see on Google or Facebook. So Bill C-18 passed on the 16th of June after very long and detailed committee hearings, and immediately Meta, Facebook, has said we're out. Meta has said, by the way, the Parliamentary Budget Office has said that deal would be, if executed, would be worth about $329 million a year to all of these media recipients. Now, the misleading part about it is it was supposed to help the publishers. They're the ones that are dying. Mm-hmm. And instead, we learned that the lion's share will go to the CBC, followed by the other broadcasters. CBC, followed by the other broadcasters, followed by Postmedia. Now, why is that? Because those are the media platforms that are shotgunning their content across the internet for free. So they have the biggest reach. So therefore, they stand to make the most money on links.
So it's so ironic, isn't it?
Right. And it's been estimated by people familiar with the newspaper industry that the amount then of money that would come to all of the print publishers together would be somewhere between $60 and $80 million. That's not enough. That's not enough. So in the meantime, if C-18 is allowed to become, well, it is law, but if it proceeds, then the secret deals, and there are 18 of them, secret deals worked out between the tech giants and media organizations, including the Globe and the Toronto Star, those deals are dead. Because if we have to provide money payment for links, then we're not going to give you your millions that we're giving you in these side deal arrangements. So what C-18 has done is furthered the mess. Meta has said we're out. Take them at their word. They've said, I've heard the Canadian spokesman for Meta, Facebook, say Canadian news links, not a big part of our business. They're worth about $300 million a year. And if we do this, well, then everybody's going to want the Canada deal. Great Britain's going to want the Canada deal, and Germany's going to want the Canada deal. And we're not in the news business. That's really not Facebook, so we're out. Mm-hmm. Google, I'm told, is still thinking about it. Google, this is just my interpretation of what's going on. Who knows, is maybe willing to kick in some money into some kind of program with a cap that would provide a little bit more money to all of them, but it still wouldn't be enough to save them. And if it was, How do you explain this sudden and dramatic announcement this week that the Toronto Star is merging with its arch enemy, the Post Media
Yeah,
newspaper chain?
exactly.
They're foundering.
So this has arguably made it more complicated. And gosh, how are we going to get out of that mess?
Well, yes, and what it's done though is part of the bill's misrepresentation, according to its proponents, was that it was going to help small providers like us. Well, all the small media that relies we you wouldn't know about Blacklocks if you didn't hear about it over the internet.
Mhm.
So to me, even though my content is locked behind a paywall, you have to pay to read it. I have access to 33 million, potentially 33 million Canadian internet users. I don't have to go door to door
Mhm.
and flog my product. Here's how you're going to hear about it.
Mhm.
So, those other outlets, and I'm thinking of a company called Village Media in Southern Ontario, a very successful company that has been running a chain of local
Yeah.
online news websites, has their business has relied almost entirely on that. And they have said they're dead if they can't if their content is not can no longer be accessible through Google or Facebook. But the government didn't want to hear that, because this is the dark part about C18. It's not about saving democracy. It's about helping the big outlets, the dying business models, who the government cannot envision uh, living without. And it's also about stagnating the smaller upstarts,
Mhm.
because the government believes that the political upstarts, the independent media, is fearsome, that they are not. I don't mean we are a threat in that we cannot be controlled. We don't take the subsidies. We wouldn't rely on payouts from C18. And they fear the left wing and the right wing of all this parade of media outlets. And so it was insincere, the bill. It not only was there to prop up Eaton's department store, it was there to make sure the small boutique operators weren't part of the spoils.
So Holly, that sounds like a brilliant summary of it, because it's nuanced and it's really speaking to the fact that it's not as simple as the overall arching message that the government is trying to portray
Mhm.
is not at all accurate. You have a very complex media environment today, and I think it's true what you're saying. We have to look at how do you support the entire ecosystem, including the smaller actors, and they're not as controllable as those large ones. And so the government has an interest in supporting those larger ones. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I think the larger ones are a little bit more reliable, and it might, be a way of maintaining your 32% in the opinion polls too. But it, the thing is, when you talk about we have to support, people ask me, well, what's the answer then? Well,
Mhm.
see, if subsidies don't work and C18's not, obviously it's a big mess and
Yeah.
more consolidation appears to be happening, and we know that's not good. What's the answer? Well, the answer is a retooling. When Eaton's died, like you thought, oh, I thought, oh my gosh, where am I
Yeah.
going to get my mixing bowls and my pantyhose? But I still found other places came around to sell
Mhm.
me my mixing bowls and my pantyhose. And I'm being a bit facetious. I don't mean to
Mhm.
compare journalism to mixing bowls.
Mhm.
One is a little bit more important, but the concept is the same. So if
Right.
you get small, listen, Canada 100 years ago had many more times the number of media outlets than we have
Yeah,
now. Most
that's
people
right.
don't realize that Winnipeg at the turn of the century had like 91 little local outlets.
Amazing.
There were little outlets you've never heard of. In Toronto, there was one called the Bloor uh, the Bloor, oh, I can't even remember the name of it. It served the Bloor Danforth corridor, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
was local news. Some of them even pooled their news out of Ottawa and shared it all, and then just provided their local news on top of that. So small media outlets, to survive, will serve their local customers, their niche, if you have it.
Mhm.
If it's not local, it's maybe niche. Blacklocks could be said to be a niche. So, but not as long as the big trees are there occupying the space. So what has to happen is that the big outlets have to get smaller. What does that mean? How do they?
Mhm.
Somebody smarter than me told me that, look, I think that the little outlets can get big, I don't think big outlets know how to get small. So if you're a big daily paper, what you have to do is pare down what you do, stop trucking newsprint, stop covering sports. Let's say you're going to be a municipal paper. Well, why not be the best municipal paper you can be? And you cover City Hall like they do. And that's what you
Exactly.
do.
Wow.
And then you leave somebody else to cover Ottawa,
Hmm.
right?
Wow.
That's just your business model. Now, I'm not saying that it immediately replaces Eaton's department store, that you got your one-stop shop when you picked up the Winnipeg Free Press or the Toronto Star, but you have to start retooling at the bottom. You have to let innovation take place, and that's not going to take place so long as you support the old business model,
Mhm.
because the old business model is the devil you know, and it's the one the government is hanging on to.
Mhm.
We have to be bold.
So, related to renewal, we've seen the last several months a lot of analysis and I think, frankly, good commentary about the challenges with our freedom of information system. Some have said it's broken. What do you think? Is it serving the public, or is it all just a big shield for the powerful?
Well, it's not even some who've said it's broken. The the information commissioner has said multiple
Indeed,
times in
yes.
testimony at committee that it's broken. She said, in fact, the last time, a month or so ago when she testified, she said that it is so hobbled. I don't remember her exact quote, but she said, effectively, it doesn't even exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
Um, the Globe and Mail with Tom Cardoso and Robin Doolittle have done an excellent project where they've been digging into the access to information problem and getting people to send examples and talking about the problems. And I commend them for that. Uh, Access to information, when it started, was innovative in the world. When Pierre Trudeau introduced it, it was among the first. We were among the first countries to do it. Over time, it has been so eroded that it is now not only one of the worst in the world, it has become, instead of a way for citizens to access information, it has become a shield for public servants to avoid releasing information. Why is that?
Mhm.
Well, it's because the reward and punishment system is backwards. So there is no punishment in the act. There is no penalty in the act for not releasing information. But if you release information that embarrasses your minister, or embarrasses your director, or embarrasses your prime minister, the prime minister, then there
Wow.
might be punishment for that. So what has to happen is you have to reverse that. So there has to be either administrative monetary penalty, or job dismissal, or jail time. I know that sounds crazy, but other acts of parliament carry jail time. This one carries no penalty.
Wow.
There has to be some penalty for not releasing information, for ignoring deadlines, for blowing past deadlines. And so that then there is impetus, there is encouragement to release, because there's punishment if you don't. So that it's backwards right now. You're rewarded for not releasing.
Mhm. So the world is a little bit upside down in 2023 when we reflect on the history of the Access to Information Act. I think that was in 1982 of all things.
That's right.
And
Yep.
we have a situation now where the government thinks it's about serving themselves and not the citizen. This is a problem.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean to laugh at your situation. It must have been incredibly frustrating, Holly, and the time and expense. But this is how they basically undermine democracy, from my perspective.
Not only does the government see partisan media outlets as a threat,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
They also see media outlets who like to read their emails as a threat. They see monsters behind every media organization except those who don't rock the boat.
Wow.
Let me give you an example. So you remember um, the former heritage minister, Melanie Joly, said, it's important that media hold us to account. I want to be held account, she said.
Mhm.
Right up until the Heritage Department is asked, why did it hire an anti-Semite? And then that question
Mm.
was never answered.
Right.
The next Heritage Minister, Mr. Rodriguez, said, I like tough questions. Ask me the tough questions. I attended a World Press Freedom event where he told the reporters in attendance, ask me the tough questions. That's great. Right up until Sam Cooper wants to know about the 11 MPs who had contacts with Chinese officials
Yeah.
prior to election. Then, then suddenly, we're not answering tough questions. We are obfuscating. We are blocking, and we are engaging in any process we can to avoid a public inquiry that would really have the tough questions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is, it can't be about rhetoric and words. It's got to be about action. And this whole nonsense undermines people's trust in government. And we need high trust if we're going to have a high functioning
And the
democracy.
thing about yes, you need information. You need transparency
Yes.
is absolutely critical. But the thing, every single government since Pierre Trudeau probably has promised to make reforms to the Access to Information Act. I'll give you every cent in my bank account if somebody actually does it.
Wow.
Every government says they want to do it, and then when they get into office, they will tinker around the edges and say, "Look, we made it better." And some governments did. Stephen Harper made crown corporations accessible to the access they weren't before.
Hmm.
Um, Scott Bryson, the former Treasury Board
Yeah.
president, capped the fee for an information request at $5. So they nibble around the edges. But I
Mhm.
mean, you should tell me a government that promises to actually make information available by default and be more transparent with media requests or requests from the public, or not see the requester as a predator, as we were described in court, and I'll vote for that person until I'm dead.
Wow. Well, you heard it on here today by you, Holly Doan, about the importance of this information and for democracy. And it's quite disturbing to hear this. And we really need to be fearsome when it comes to pursuing this information. For everything's really at stake because all of this relates to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, which has really been foundational to move our society forward, hasn't it, Holly?
Yeah, and you know that all these attempts to monitor the internet to penalize for hurtful but legal comment on the internet, the move to create a digital safety commissioner that would be responsible for chasing down people who make
Exactly.
remarks, the supports to media that acts as a harness on media freedom. All of these things are an attack on the freedom of expression, I think, and media control in particular. You know, media freedom is guaranteed in our Constitution. What does that mean? Freedom of expression in the Constitution. That means freedom from government regulation. That's what
Exactly.
that means.
Yeah.
What else does it mean? Who else is gonna limit my freedom?
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do it, but I guess the Minister of Heritage can. That's what it means. So we are trespassing on everything, all the foundational things that we used to believe in this country.
Yeah. Wow. And well said. And we can't take it for granted. So this gets me to my next question around, there's a lot of confusing terms used like misinformation versus disinformation. So what do we mean by those terms, Holly?
I don't get too obsessed about them. I'm more worried about just finding facts in my day to
Exactly.
day
Yes.
business.
Right.
But my understanding is that misinformation is a misrepresenting or a twisting of the
Mhm.
facts or an omission, whereas disinformation is actually something that's wrong to lead you to a different conclusion.
So
And there's
what,
another one called malinformation, but
yes, and
oh, you got to
malinformation.
Google that.
Right. But what I find so ironic, even paradoxical, is the whole throwing around of these terms by who is it again? Oh, yes, a lot of government leaders and actors as a kind of a pretext to do what? To shut down discussion, to shut down the facts. Am I
Right.
misreading that?
Well, and I do believe it when I say that. Well, there might be misinformation out there from online bad
Yeah,
actors.
sure.
I
Sure.
see those, and I just block them and I don't
Mhm.
follow them. Now, maybe if some people can't parse through that, that's a problem. But one way to replace misinformation is replace it with information.
Right.
When the people who are supposed to be providing information leave the field, when they leave the arena, then all these bad actors will step in there. So with the failure of journalism to be providers of real information, and I don't mean press releases or today's theater and question period, but to provide real information, as we were talking about earlier, about the outcome of government programs, not merely the announcements, then the perpetrators of misinformation will find their way into our narrative. And
Exactly.
that's the problem.
Yeah, and also we need to encourage each other, to commend each other in a respectful way, to dare to have the confidence to have a real debate. Healthy debates and discussions are good, are they not, Holly?
Well, sure. And when reporters actually find some information and report it, who the hell is a government MP, some MP from Whitby, to call that reporter up before committee and bully him for his
Exactly.
story?
Yeah.
Who is the authority
Wow.
from the MP from Whitby on Chinese interference? To You can't have it both
No,
ways.
this is
You can't
utterly
say
wrong.
media and
Yeah, shame on that MP. So the Twitter files, we've learned a lot about misinformation. So we found out a lot of things, including how 18 US government agencies were systematically censoring, blocking, changing, canceling all kinds of information on every key narrative on the internet, from COVID-19 to a myriad of other things, just like narrow political agenda. It was really quite disgusting. So were the Twitter files a surprise to you, Holly, and the reaction that came out of that?
I maybe this is going to surprise you. I find the flood of American news is another problem for Canada.
Yes,
That the
it
flood
is.
of American news replaces the news that should be about Canada, and so that people who are at home watching CNN start to think that that's their narrative is about us.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not. But however, having said that, we did find out that a government department, and the individuals were named, contacted Twitter and Facebook and asked them to take down a column by Edmonton Sun columnist Lauren Gunter. And so it was happening here. Do I think it was happening to the extent that we see in America? I'm not really sure. But then maybe it's the dog that didn't bark. I think Matt Taibbi, the reporter who broke that, said there was some evidence of
Mhm.
Canadian departments involved.
Yes.
But I never heard many stories other than that one. Did you?
I had heard about a number of them, but I think your main point is very, very important, and that is how much U.S. information spills, obviously not in just not into Canada, but really around the world, and how
Hmm.
that drives these dysfunctional narratives or lack of information. When in fact Canada could
Hmm.
be, well, I know your vision is, could be a wellspring of vigorous journalism and information. Ironically,
I'm always almost grief stricken when I see any story, let's say a lead or the second story on CBC or CTV that's about an American story.
right? I agree.
I don't want to hear about Hunter Biden
Yeah.
laptop or the Twitter files at the
Mhm.
top of my Canadian newscast. I think that
Yeah.
is replacing the news that they're not bothering to get for you about what there's plenty going on in this country. And I am, it's funny. It's so cute to think, like, when Sheila Copps was heritage minister in the 90s, she legislated that the American news magazines Time and Newsweek what had to have a Canadian insert in the
Yes, I
middle,
remember that.
because
Yes.
it was trying to battle this Canadian this pollution, this
Right.
cross-border cultural pollution. How quaint to
Yeah.
think of that now. We are overwhelmed by it. So again, if we leave the field, all that American garbage
Right on.
comes in.
Well, and the other irony is that it almost seems like some politicians in Canada use that as a kind of a foil to try to transplant that narrative simplistically
Roe
into
versus
Canada.
Wade. Roe versus Wade. My
Yeah.
my goodness, could it happen here?
Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah. So when I look at the state of journalism in 2023, it sounds like a pretty mixed bag. We know it's so important. Um, and if you look at hope and action that we can take as citizens, what can we do to help move this agenda forward and help strengthen journalism? It's such a critical part of democracy in our country. Any advice?
Well, it would be too easy for me to say carefully analyze your media options, both large organizations in mainstream and small media outlets.
Mhm.
Try to set your partisan views aside, left or right, and have a look at an organization and ask, who are they? Are they journalists? Are they activists? Are they partisans from another life?
Mhm.
Are they journalists? What is the and subscribe, pay? And I know people say, well, I don't have so much money, and so much of my money is already going in to the
Mhm.
CBC and to the other mainstream media. But it's not too crazy to say you should write to your MP, particularly if your MP is a liberal.
Absolutely.
But I also think that it's time to take access to information more seriously. Why are you leaving it to half a dozen journalists who are overworked and maybe on the edge of being laid off or retired? Like, Canadians have to, if you're an activist in your local constituency association, I think you should participate in that way. Access to information is important. Look into that one. Ask your party and your to make changes, to commit to changes, because transparency is key. Um, I think go a little easy on individual journalists. This is an industry that is in crisis. It is a wholesale depression. If it was any other industry, if it was mining or forestry, like,
Mhm.
people would be in Ottawa, like with pitchforks, demanding that the government do something about it. And I think that individual reporters can only do so much. So I would say go easy on them in social media, but where you can, subscribe, speak up, offer testimonials, say what you want, tell the government what you want. And that doesn't just mean sitting in your basement, like grousing on Twitter.
Well said. Holly Doan, the publisher of Blacklocks Reporter. We're so delighted that we could have this conversation. And thank you so much for your courage and your leadership.
Well, I think, I lived in China and we had a phrase there. It was called, it said, Niguo Jiangla, which means basically translated, you overpraise.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And 谢谢.
Thank you. 再见.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.